The intercom echoed throughout the cabin, making everyone hold their breath. "Passenger Jamal Brooks, please move to the back of the plane immediately. Otherwise, the flight will be diverted for an emergency landing." In that brief moment, all eyes turned to Jamal, the man standing up among hundreds of people in a suffocating atmosphere of injustice. Without a trace of fear, he spoke, his voice deep but unwavering. "I haven't violated any rules. I'm just protecting my rights. This is discrimination, and I won't stay silent." No one could have predicted that this small but courageous act would ignite a battle for justice in the sky, forever changing how an airline faces the truth. Join us as we embark on this dramatic journey where courage, unity, and justice are tested in the skies. If you love inspiring stories, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel to not miss the next incredible journeys. In the strangest of stories that unfold in the sky, sometimes the danger doesn't come from a malfunctioning engine, but from the very prejudices of humanity. On what seemed like an ordinary flight from Boston to San Diego, an incident erupted, stunning all the passengers. A sudden decision by a man not only caused a stir but also exposed hidden secrets, setting the stage for a battle for justice in the skies. Jamal Brooks, a tall African-American man in his early 30s, was all too familiar with drawing attention. Sometimes it was admiration, other times suspicion. But on that Thursday morning at Logan International Airport, he could clearly sense an unease creeping through the air. Maybe it was just the nervousness about the important meeting in San Diego, or perhaps his intuition was warning him of something. Flight KS907 of Skywave Airlines, operated by a Boeing 737, was the only chance he had to make it to the meeting on time. Dodging through the crowded coffee stands and brightly lit souvenir shops, Jamal finally reached the boarding gate. The electronic display flashed the announcement that Flight KS907 to San Diego was on schedule. The airport staff began calling the first class and priority passengers. Jamal glanced at his ticket, Group 4, boldly printed on the white background. He didn't usually fly first class. This ticket had been purchased hastily the day before. Still, fortunately, his seat was in the main cabin extra, where there was more legroom than usual, a rare luxury for a rush trip like this. As he waited to board, Jamal felt the familiar unease creeping in. The long line of people behind him, each with a look either eager or exhausted, typical for early flights. Some were looking down at their phones, others were gazing up at the boarding signs. When Group 4 was called, Jamal made his way to the ticket scanner. His phone beeped in confirmation, and the plane door swung open to welcome him. A brief wave of claustrophobia washed over him, as it always did when he stepped into these narrow aisles where even a small misunderstanding could lead to disaster. Inside the plane, the hum of the ventilation fans mixed with the smell of morning coffee. Jamal let out a small sigh of relief. Everything seemed fine, until he caught the eye of a tall, broad-shouldered flight attendant with a professional smile. "Sir, your seat is to the left, 9A, Chloe said softly. Jamal nodded in thanks and moved toward the window seat. The middle-aged woman next to him, engrossed in her magazine, glanced at him, nodded, and then returned to reading. In that moment, everything seemed peaceful. Until a sharp voice rang out behind him. "That's my seat." Jamal froze. A middle-aged man, his eyes scrutinizing, was staring at him. Instinctively, Jamal checked the seat again. Yes, the overhead compartment clearly displayed 9A. He glanced down at his ticket, confirming it was correct. The man, visibly angry, thrust his ticket in front of Chloe. "This is my seat. He needs to move," he insisted. Chloe calmly checked the ticket, her eyebrows furrowed slightly. "Sir, your ticket says 9C. This passenger is sitting in the correct seat." "Please move," she explained, maintaining a polite tone. The man shot Jamal a cold look and reluctantly shuffled over to seat 9C. The minor incident was quickly resolved, but Jamal's unease lingered. He fastened his seatbelt tightly, silently hoping this would be the last of the discomforts on the flight. Passengers continued to board. A young mother struggled with her crying baby at the back of the cabin. An elderly couple held hands tightly, as if praying. A businessman in a well-tailored suit hunched over his laptop, typing away. So many stories, so many different lives, all compressed into the small space, about to take off into the sky. Little did they know they were about to become part of a much bigger story. A crackling sound came from the intercom. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Captain Bradley Shaw, your pilot for today's flight. We will be departing for San Diego shortly. The flight time is expected to be approximately 5 hours and 40 minutes. We may experience some turbulence over the Sierra Nevada. Please follow the instructions of the flight crew. Wishing you all a safe flight." Captain Shaw's voice was hoarse, full of authority, the tone of someone used to making decisions. Jamal quietly switched his phone to airplane mode and pulled out a thick stack of documents in preparation for the important meeting ahead. Jamal was a senior consultant at Halston & Myers, a firm specializing in auditing and regulatory compliance. His work frequently involved coordinating with agencies like the Federal Aviation Authority. His attention to detail and professional demeanor were a source of pride for him. As he was skimming through a section of the documents, Jamal noticed Chloe returning, her face displaying a hint of confusion. She stopped next to a few passengers, checked their tickets, then made her way to Jamal's row. "Sir, may I trouble you to check your ticket once more?" she asked. Jamal frowned, but still politely handed her his phone. Chloe compared the barcode on the ticket with the list on her tablet. "That's correct," she whispered, offering a forced smile. "Thank you." Yet, Jamal could clearly sense that something was amiss. The woman sitting next to him, Marjorie, leaned in and whispered, "It's probably just a system glitch." "Don't worry," Jamal nodded, trying to refocus on his documents. But the uneasy feeling lingered. The flight was about to take off, and passengers had settled into their seats. The flight attendants closed the plane doors. The roar of the engines filled the cabin as the Boeing 737 sped down the runway. Jamal felt the familiar surge of adrenaline as the wheels lifted off the ground. He glanced around, noticing Marjorie gripping the armrest tightly, while the man who had argued about seat 9A looked nervously around. The baby's cries echoed throughout the cabin. It seemed as if every one of Jamal's senses was on high alert. He exhaled in relief when the seatbelt sign turned off, signaling the end of the tense takeoff phase. The flight attendants pushed the drink cart down the aisle. Passengers popped in their earbuds, opened laptops to work, or simply closed their eyes to rest. Jamal allowed himself to relax a bit, thinking that the initial discomfort had passed. Until the cockpit door swung open. Captain Bradley Shaw stepped out, his face visibly angry. From his seat, Jamal couldn't hear the exchange between Shaw and the young head flight attendant, Liam, but he could clearly see Liam's tense expression and Shaw's angry scowl. Shaw's eyes scanned the cabin before landing, unmistakably on Jamal. His lips pressed tightly together. Jamal felt a shiver run down his spine. He reassured himself that it could just be a coincidence, but deep down he knew this flight was not going to be simple. It could be anything, but deep down, Jamal Brooks knew that an invisible clash was becoming increasingly evident. With each passing minute, the trip seemed to be turning into something unstable. About an hour after takeoff, the seatbelt sign flashed again. The Boeing 737 entered a turbulent airspace, causing the drink carts to shake. The flight attendants hurriedly stowed away items that had not been secured. Over the intercom, Captain Bradley Shaw announced in a hoarse voice that the plane was flying through bad weather, but would soon pass through it. Jamal turned his head to look out of the small window. A sea of white clouds lay beneath the morning sun. He took a deep breath, trying to refocus on the stack of documents in his hands. But just as he was starting to regain his composure, Chloe appeared again, her face showing more concern than before. She leaned in and whispered softly, "Sir, the captain requests that you change seats." Jamal furrowed his brow. "Me? Why?" Chloe quickly glanced around as if afraid someone might overhear. "He thinks the balance of the cabin needs to be adjusted, and it seems your seat was assigned incorrectly." Her voice trembled as if she couldn't believe the reason herself. "He's asking you to move to the back of the plane," Chloe continued, her eyes avoiding his. Jamal's heart raced. "Did he specifically mention me?" he asked. Chloe's confused look answered for her. "He asked for a few people, and you're one of them," she stammered, her anxiety unmistakable. Jamal took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "This is the seat listed on my ticket, which you just checked. If there is a legitimate reason, I'm happy to cooperate. But the weight distribution isn't supposed to target one individual." "Why me?" Chloe swallowed, trying to maintain her professionalism. I'm not sure, sir. Could you let me sit here for a moment while you verify this?" Jamal suggested. But before Chloe could answer, Liam, the young flight attendant, placed a hand on her shoulder and whispered, "We have to follow the captain's orders." Jamal could feel the tension spreading across the rows as a few passengers overheard the exchange. Mrs. Marjorie, the woman sitting next to him, had a look of outrage, but remained silent. On the opposite row, some other passengers were also watching closely. Jamal kept his voice calm. "No, I won't move unless there's a legitimate safety reason. From what I understand about airline procedures, this has no foundation." Liam's face turned red. "Sir, if the captain—" Jamal interrupted. "I'm not causing trouble. I bought a valid ticket and am sitting in the correct seat. If the captain has an issue, he can come speak to me directly." Chloe looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and fear, as if wanting to thank him but also worried Jamal might cause them trouble. The atmosphere in the cabin was tense as the plane shook lightly from the turbulence. What Jamal didn't know was that in the cockpit at that moment, Captain Bradley Shaw was boiling with anger. He was someone who could not tolerate anyone questioning his authority. About 20 minutes later, the turbulence eased. Passengers murmured among themselves. Jamal overheard a few snippets. "Unbelievable. They're making him move. Could it be a racial issue? I've heard that captain has a bad reputation." The last comment made Jamal's hair stand on end. He turned back and caught sight of a small girl wearing glasses, gently scrolling on her phone, but when she noticed Jamal looking, she quickly hid the phone. Before he could ask anything else, the intercom buzzed, and Captain Shaw's gruff voice echoed, "Ladies and gentlemen, due to unusual weather conditions, we will be adjusting the flight path. If the flight attendants ask you to change seats, please comply immediately for safety reasons." The entire cabin fell into a state of confusion. Chloe, Liam, and another flight attendant began walking down the aisle, holding a list. Some passengers were asked to change seats, but most remained where they were. Finally, when they reached row 9, where Jamal was sitting, Liam cleared his throat. "Sir, I must request that you move. The captain has ordered it. You need to move to seat 27B. Jamal nodded, but didn't stand up. "Then I would like to speak directly with him. I have a few questions about this safety procedure." He pulled a business card from his jacket pocket. "Jamal Brooks, Senior Consultant for Aviation Safety Compliance, Halston and Myers." Liam's eyes widened. I'll relay the message right away." Liam hurried to the front. About 10 minutes later, no one had appeared. The crying of a baby echoed from the last row, but the cabin had generally quieted down. Jamal took a sip of ginger ale, his mind still spinning with possibilities. Could this just be a technical error, or was a more subtle form of discrimination unfolding? Jamal had often encountered strange looks and unfriendly comments from airline staff, but never as clearly and openly as this. The cockpit door opened. Captain Bradley Shaw stepped out, his posture rigid and his eyes cold. He was in his late 40s or early 50s, with short gray hair, his uniform pressed neatly, the gold epaulette gleaming under the light. The entire cabin fell silent as he walked straight toward Jamal. When he reached him, Captain Shaw stopped, his lips tightly pressed into a cold line. "I hear you've requested to speak with me." His voice emphasized politeness, but carried a hint of contempt. Jamal looked up, responding calmly. "I want to understand why I was asked to change seats. I was told it was for weight distribution, but I haven't been provided with any specific evidence. Furthermore, there are other passengers in this row. Why choose me?" Captain Shaw paused for a few seconds, as if considering how to respond. "We don't have much time, Mr. Brooks," he said coldly, glancing at the business card Jamal still held. "I don't need to explain every operational decision to passengers. If I say it's for safety, then it's for safety." Jamal restrained his anger. "I have great respect for safety procedures, Captain, but I'm also quite familiar with FAA regulations. Weight and balance issues are usually handled before takeoff. If there are changes, they should be systematically redistributed, not just randomly applied to one individual." Captain Shaw's face darkened. "You're not a pilot," he snapped. "You don't command this plane. You have to follow orders." "Or what?" Jamal asked, his voice calm but firm, his eyes locked on Shaw's. The entire cabin held its breath. "Are you going to land the plane and throw me off?" Jamal added, his voice still resolute. Captain Shaw clenched his fists, his face reddening with anger. Jamal maintained his firm tone. "I want to remind you that if you force me to move without a legitimate safety—" The atmosphere in the cabin seemed to freeze. "A serious issue. If a pilot wants to request a passenger to move seats, they must have a clear safety reason, not a personal preference." Captain Bradley Shaw clenched his jaw, looking as though he was about to impose some sort of punishment. But just then Chloe, who had been quietly observing from a few rows away, unexpectedly spoke up. "Excuse me, Captain, sorry to interrupt," she said quickly, "but the Air Traffic Control Center is calling about the flight path change." Captain Shaw took a deep breath, shot a fiery glare at Jamal Brooks, and angrily turned back toward the cockpit, leaving behind an atmosphere thick with tension, as if ready to explode. For about an hour afterward, the plane sailed smoothly through the sky, but in row 9, the tension remained heavy. Passengers whispered among themselves. Some repeated that they had heard Captain Shaw had been reprimanded for outbursts in the past. Another passenger mentioned reading an article about Skywave Airlines facing issues with diversity training. Mrs. Marjorie, the older woman sitting next to Jamal, gently patted his shoulder, speaking warmly. "You're very calm. I admire that." Jamal nodded in thanks, whispering, "I just hope everything ends peacefully." But the trouble was quietly growing. Occasionally, Liam or Chloe would walk past, their worried eyes glancing at Jamal as if they were silently keeping watch or preparing to handle the next potential situation. When the seatbelt sign went off again and the plane suddenly dropped as if it had fallen into an air pocket, the air became more stifling than ever. Suddenly, a voice rang out from behind. "Excuse me, are you Jamal Brooks?" Jamal turned around. It was the small girl wearing glasses from earlier, hesitant but with a determined look in her eyes. "I overheard your conversation with the captain," she said quietly. "You mentioned working in aviation compliance?" Jamal nodded, and her eyes brightened with interest. "That's right. I'm a consultant, and our company specializes in many areas, but we mainly focus on FAA regulations." The girl extended her hand. "I'm Samantha Lee, a journalist who writes about civil rights in corporate environments. I've heard about Captain Shaw. There are rumors that he's been accused of discrimination, especially against minority passengers." Samantha lowered her voice. "I was planning to investigate, but all the information seems to be suppressed." Jamal furrowed his brow. "I haven't heard anything specific about him," he said, "but based on his behavior today, I wouldn't be surprised if those rumors are true." Samantha nodded firmly. "If you plan to take this further, I'm willing to help. I can connect you with a few sources." Jamal gave a slight smile. "Let's wait and see how the flight unfolds. I might need your help." Just as the words left his mouth, the plane shook more violently. The cabin lights flickered. The overhead compartments rattled loudly, and some passengers screamed in fear. The seatbelt sign flashed continuously. Jamal and Samantha exchanged worried glances. The intercom buzzed. Captain Shaw's tense voice came through. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're passing through unexpected turbulence. Please remain seated and keep your seatbelts fastened." There was a brief pause, and then his voice came through more sharply. "And please comply immediately with all instructions from the cockpit. If not, we will be forced to take strong measures to ensure safety." The warning carried an implicit threat, causing a stir throughout the cabin. The plane veered. Chloe rushed down the aisle, trying to maintain her balance while ensuring all the trays were stowed away and passengers had their seatbelts fastened. As she passed Jamal, she whispered quickly, "Sorry about what happened earlier. He has also treated the crew poorly." Before she could say more, the plane suddenly lurched to the side as if struck by wind. A few screams echoed, drinks spilling everywhere. Sasha clung tightly to her seat to avoid falling. For several minutes, the cabin was filled with chaos. The overhead compartments shook repeatedly. The feeling of freefall squeezed Jamal's chest. He wondered in panic, could Captain Shaw have deliberately flown into the turbulent zone to apply pressure? The thought seemed crazy. But the atmosphere in the cabin was anything but calm. Finally, the shaking eased into smaller bumps. The air relaxed a bit as passengers began to exhale in relief. Captain Shaw's voice came through the intercom again. "Sorry for the inconvenience. We've avoided most of the turbulence. We will make an effort to make up for the lost time and land on schedule." Jamal silently stared at the overhead lights. He could feel the bitterness seeping into Captain Shaw's voice. If personal emotions were influencing flight behavior, the safety of everyone on board was truly at risk. The air of instability quickly spread throughout the cabin. Those who had witnessed the earlier events began murmuring in support of Jamal. When Jamal went to the restroom, a middle-aged couple whispered to him, "We support you." A young passenger in a sports cap, headphones on, also nodded in silent approval. Jamal felt the quiet solidarity bolstering his resolve. When he returned to his seat, Samantha whispered, "I've spoken to at least 6 people. Everyone's angry about Captain Shaw's behavior. Some are texting complaints to the airline hotline." However, as the plane reached cruising altitude, another worry overshadowed Jamal. Would Captain Shaw be alert enough to realize he was digging himself into a deeper hole? Or was he too arrogant to stop? As for the flight attendants like Chloe and Liam, they were caught in a power struggle, trying to do their jobs while also wanting to protect justice. Nearly halfway through the flight, the seatbelt sign went off. Some passengers took the opportunity to stretch their legs and use the restroom. Chloe hurried over, her face pale. "Sir," she whispered, "the captain is requesting you change seats right now." Jamal clenched his jaw. "Again? We've passed through the turbulence." Chloe hesitated. He said, "Your presence here is obstructing operations. No more mention of weight distribution. Now it's a matter of command." "Command?" Jamal repeated, his gaze growing colder. Before Chloe could respond, the intercom blared loudly throughout the cabin. "Attention, passengers! Jamal Brooks in seat 9, please move to the rear of the plane. This is an order from the cockpit. If you refuse, the flight will be diverted and you will be escorted off the plane." A wave of murmurs swept through the cabin. Everyone turned to look at Jamal. The air thickened again like before a storm. Jamal felt the fury rising inside him. This was no longer just a seat change request. This was a public attack. Jamal stood up, his gaze unwavering, and called out loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. "Everyone, please listen to me." Jamal Brooks stood in the aisle, his voice not loud but resonating throughout the cabin. "I'm being asked to move seats without a legitimate safety reason. I'm not disrupting the flight, and I haven't violated any rules. This is clearly discrimination." Whispers erupted like a wave. Some passengers nodded vigorously, and a few even clapped in support. Eyes full of worry and outrage swept across the cabin. Chloe stood beside him, looking as if she might cry, caught between the lines. Behind Jamal, Samantha Lee stood up, holding her phone, boldly announcing, "I'm recording this. If the captain forces Jamal Brooks off the flight, we have several witnesses ready to testify. This is harassment, and it's unacceptable." Cheers and angry voices echoed down the aisles. In that moment, Jamal feared that the captain might act out of control, perhaps force an emergency landing or call in security. But the Boeing continued its steady journey towards San Diego. In the cockpit, Captain Bradley Shaw sat frozen, his face flushed with anger. Beside him, First Officer Aaron Wells, a calm man, occasionally glanced at the captain with concern. Aaron gathered his courage and spoke softly. "Captain, perhaps we should let this go?" Diverting the flight over a seating dispute, especially with potential racial discrimination involved, could bring the airline major trouble. Captain Shaw glared at Aaron. "You're not the one in charge here. I make the decisions. That passenger is challenging my authority. If we back down, we lose all credibility." Aaron swallowed, knowing well Shaw's temper, but this situation had crossed a line. "With all due respect, Captain," Aaron emphasized, "we're facing a media crisis. Passengers are siding with him. From a safety perspective, we have no legitimate reason to escalate this situation." Captain Shaw ground his teeth, eyes glued to the control panel. "Because I ordered it. End of story." He lunged at the communication system and broadcasted through the intercom. "Flight attendants, request that Passenger Brooks move his seat immediately. If not, we will change course for an emergency landing. You have 5 minutes." The cabin fell into a heavy silence. Chloe, Liam, and another flight attendant hurried over to Jamal's seat. Chloe swallowed, her voice trembling. "He's giving us 5 minutes to convince you to move. If not, we'll have to make an emergency landing." Jamal turned to look at the passengers around him. "Everyone," he spoke in a deep but forceful tone, "are you all willing to endure a disrupted flight delayed for hours just because of this? I don't want to inconvenience anyone." A voice from the back of the cabin called out, "It's not your fault. He's the one being unreasonable." Many other passengers joined in, voicing their support. Samantha Lee was still recording, stepping up beside Jamal. "We stand with you. If you give in, you'll be condoning this discriminatory behavior." Jamal looked into the faces around him. People with work to do, families to meet, long trips planned. He wrestled with his inner turmoil. Should he sacrifice himself to avoid causing problems for everyone, or should he stand up and expose the injustice? Suddenly, from the back of the cabin, a young male voice rang out. No one should bow down to racial discrimination. It was a young black man, probably in his early 20s, standing up and raising his fist. "I've had enough. Don't back down!" A round of applause erupted. The cabin exploded into a wave of unity. Jamal felt a surge of strength rise in his chest. He took a deep breath. "All right," he declared, "I'm staying in my seat." The plane continued to glide smoothly at altitude, but the tension in the cabin thickened with every passing moment. People whispered among themselves, would the captain really change course? Where would they land? Denver, Las Vegas, or Phoenix? The costs, consequences, and chaos that would follow would be enormous. Exactly 5 minutes later, Captain Shaw's voice rang out, cold and chilling, throughout the cabin. We will divert to Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport for an emergency landing. A collective sigh of disappointment filled the air. Some passengers cursed, others turned to look at Jamal with expressions of sympathy and resignation. Jamal felt his stomach twist. Because of one person's ego, hundreds of passengers were now suffering. But fate had intervened. Less than 10 seconds later, the intercom crackled with a message from air traffic control, now audible outside the cockpit system. Flight KS-907, be advised, there is a major storm at Phoenix. The airport is temporarily closed for the next 2 hours. Please wait to be rerouted or choose an alternate landing site. The entire cabin fell silent. They could clearly hear Captain Shaw cursing in the cockpit, as he apparently forgot to mute the cabin broadcast. Then the transmission was cut off. The plane continued flying westward while the cockpit reconsidered their plan. 10 minutes later, Captain Shaw trudged out of the cockpit, his face dark with anger. He stormed straight toward Jamal, followed by Liam and Chloe, both looking visibly uncomfortable. Captain Shaw's voice dropped low. "We can't land in Phoenix, but if you don't move, I'll find another airport, even if it means delaying for hours." Jamal restrained his anger. "Captain, do you hear what the passengers are saying? They don't want this to continue." Captain Shaw growled, "I don't take orders from passengers. This is my plane." Jamal remained calm, but sharp. "Legally, yes, you have the authority to command this plane. But you also have a responsibility to follow anti-discrimination laws. If you want to escalate this further, I'm ready to handle it with a lawyer, the FAA, and the Department of Transportation." Around them, many passengers had pulled out their phones to record. Seeing this, Captain Shaw's eyes widened, and he yelled, "Stop filming! No recording!" But no one stopped. Samantha Lee stepped forward. "We have the right to record evidence of civil rights violations, Captain." For a moment, it seemed like Captain Shaw might lose control, but Liam quickly placed a hand on his shoulder. "Captain, please return to the cockpit. The skies are clear. We need to focus." Shaw shot Jamal a hostile look before turning on his heel and heading back toward the cockpit. The cabin sank back into an eerie silence. The plane continued its westward flight, everyone tense, unsure whether Captain Shaw would continue to escalate the situation. Then Chloe cautiously approached Jamal, bending low to whisper, "You mentioned you work with the FAA, right? If you have any way to request a safety inspection right now, please." Jamal frowned. "You mean a safety inspection mid-flight?" Chloe nodded urgently. "We're afraid he'll do something reckless. If the FAA or the airline knows about this soon, they might force him to be more cautious." Jamal paused for a moment. He turned to Samantha and whispered, "If we have enough witnesses and evidence, I can send an urgent report to the FAA and the parent company. If we're lucky, they might intervene immediately." Samantha nodded seriously. "Let's do it." With the plan now in motion, Jamal Brooks decided to act immediately. He signaled to Samantha Lee and several other passengers who had supported him earlier. The small group quickly gathered witness statements and recorded videos of the incident. Despite the weak and intermittent Wi-Fi on the plane, they still tried to draft the complaint. Samantha wrote the content concisely, while Jamal attached the relevant FAA flight safety regulations. The email was sent to several places: the FAA's hotline, the customer service director of Skywave Airlines, and the U.S. Department of Transportation. The subject of the email clearly read, "Urgent, discriminatory, and unsafe behavior of Captain of Flight, KS-907. They attached the evidence, including Chloe's, Liam's, and other passengers' testimonies. After hitting send, everyone nervously waited, hoping the weak Wi-Fi signal on the plane would allow the email to leave the outbox. A miracle happened. Samantha's phone now displayed sent. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere seemed to calm a bit. Passengers whispered and discussed among themselves, some sharing snacks, others offering quiet words of encouragement. The seatbelt sign came on again, but this time It wasn't due to bad weather. The plane suddenly began to descend faster than usual, as if preparing for a sudden change in course. Everyone gripped the armrests, holding their breath. About half an hour later, as the plane flew over the vast Arizona desert, Chloe hurried over. "Mr. Jamal," she whispered, "the cockpit just received a direct message from headquarters. The captain looks extremely angry. I guess it's because of your complaint." Jamal's heart raced. "They responded already?" Chloe nodded. "I couldn't see the details, but the look on his face. You should prepare yourself." In the distance, Liam also subtly nodded at Jamal, as if silently offering support. Hope flickered in those who had been following the incident from the beginning. But would Captain Shaw comply with the instructions, or would he defy everything? Soon enough, Captain Shaw stormed out of the cockpit once more, his face pale with fury. He marched straight toward row 9. Ignoring the surprised looks of the passengers, he growled, "You dare send a complaint during the flight as if I'm a rookie pilot? I've been a pilot for 20 years. No passenger is allowed to disrespect me like this." Many passengers raised their phones to record. Jamal maintained his calm voice. "I'm not doing this personally, Captain. I'm doing this for everyone's safety and for my own rights." Captain Shaw scanned the cabin, his eyes stopping at the phones pointed at him. In that moment, he looked like an animal cornered. Pointing directly at Jamal, he yelled, "Enough! I'll divert to Phoenix and you'll be escorted off the plane. Everyone will continue flying without you." Immediately, a wave of anger surged. Passengers stood up in protest. Mrs. Marjorie, now fully supporting Jamal, shouted, "This is outrageous! If he's forced off the plane, we'll all file a complaint." Samantha Lee stepped forward, raising her phone. "Captain, the whole world will see this. You've received instructions from headquarters to stop this, haven't you?" A flicker of hesitation passed over Captain Shaw's face. He quickly glanced at his watch, as if weighing the consequences of the timing. Finally, he snarled, "Fine, stay in your seat, but don't think I'll forget this." Before anyone could breathe a sigh of relief, an alarm sounded from the cockpit. Captain Shaw immediately spun around and dashed forward. The cabin was filled with whispers of confusion. Jamal exchanged worried glances with Samantha and Chloe. "What's going on now?" he whispered. Chloe shook her head. "Not sure. Maybe a technical glitch." Sure enough, a few minutes later, First Officer Aaron Wells made an announcement. "Dear passengers, the system has detected a small technical issue. As per protocol, we will begin to descend early to prepare for landing in San Diego. Please keep your seatbelts fastened." A sense of relief spread among the passengers. At least they were still heading toward San Diego. The flight attendants quickly cleared the trays and secured the luggage. But the worry was still visible in everyone's eyes. The plane occasionally shook, possibly from turbulence or the minor technical issue. Samantha quietly kept filming, gripping her phone tightly. Chloe leaned toward row 9, whispering encouragement to Jamal. "Hang in there. We're almost there." As the Boeing descended, children cried out in pain from ear pressure. Adults yawned repeatedly to balance the pressure. Through the window, the vast horizon of San Diego appeared, the shimmering ocean in the distance. Jamal closed his eyes and took a deep breath. This was undoubtedly the most stressful flight of his life. He still had a big meeting waiting for him, but now what he thought about more was, would Captain Shaw be held accountable, or would the airline cover for him? He looked around, familiar faces filled with support, the video evidence, the testimonies of Chloe and Liam. He knew at least that he wasn't alone. When the plane touched down safely, a cheer erupted throughout the cabin, followed by applause as if a weight had been lifted. But the joy quickly gave way to tension. Everyone sat quietly, fastening their seatbelts, waiting. Would security be waiting for them at the jet bridge? Would Jamal be arrested on the spot? The baggage claim signs lit up. The flight attendants quickly opened the doors. Chloe stepped forward, glanced at Jamal, and whispered, "Good luck." The cockpit door opened. Captain Shaw stepped out, his face tired and his eyes still full of hostility. He didn't say a word as he strode quickly past, as though trying to avoid facing the judgmental looks. Next came First Officer Aaron, who gave a soft nod to the passengers as an unspoken apology. As the passengers began to disembark, Jamal and Samantha intentionally stayed at the back to avoid the crowd. As they entered the jet bridge area, they were immediately stopped by 2 uniformed airline staff members and 2 transport security officers. Jamal felt his body tense up. Samantha continued to discreetly film with her phone. The lead woman, named Elaine Marshall, station manager, spoke in a calm voice. "Mr. Brooks, Ms. Lee, and the passengers involved, please follow us. We need to take statements about the incident on this flight." In the distance, Captain Shaw stood with his arms crossed, leaning against the wall, looking furious. Elaine glanced at him, then decisively said, "Captain, we'll meet with you later in the meeting room." Immediately, Elaine Marshall, the station manager, spoke in a calm, professional tone. "Mr. Jamal Brooks, Ms. Samantha Lee, and all concerned passengers, please follow us. We need to take statements. We've received multiple reports about the incident on flight KS-907. In the distance, Captain Bradley Shaw stood with his arms crossed, his jaw clenched with anger. When Elaine glanced at him, she decisively added, "Captain, we'll meet with you later in the private room." Shaw was about to protest, but Elaine raised her hand to signal for silence. "We've been instructed by headquarters to give this matter our absolute priority," she stated firmly. Elaine led the group of passengers, including Jamal, Samantha, Marjorie, the young man who had raised his fist, and a few others, to a nearby meeting room. Chloe and Liam were also present, providing the crew's perspective. Jamal was very impressed with the consistency of everyone's testimony. Captain Shaw had repeatedly harassed Jamal without cause, demanding that he move seats without justification, threatening to divert the flight, publicly calling him out over the intercom, and creating a tense atmosphere in the cabin. Elaine and a regional representative from the airline carefully took notes, their faces clearly expressing concern. Samantha submitted the video footage she had recorded, while other passengers provided images from various angles. Once all the testimonies were completed, Elaine sighed, her eyes heavy with sorrow. "I truly apologize. This is absolutely not the standard of service and professionalism we expect from our pilots. Thank you all for speaking out. We will conduct a thorough investigation." She gathered everyone's contact information and promised to provide updates as soon as possible. Elaine also gave each passenger a travel voucher as an apology, but everyone was more focused on justice than on the gift. Jamal was then asked to stay for a little while longer. Elaine explained, "We're interviewing the captain separately and need to confirm a few more details before we complete the report." Samantha offered to stay with Jamal, despite his suggestion that she could leave first. Mrs. Marjorie also insisted on staying to offer her moral support. About an hour later, Elaine returned, looking exhausted. "Captain Shaw will be temporarily suspended from flying while the investigation is ongoing." She looked directly at Jamal. "And I predict he will face serious disciplinary action." Jamal nodded. "I don't want anyone to lose their job, but passengers can't be treated like this." Elaine responded, "We understand, and we are committed to handling this fairly." In the days that followed, the story quickly spread through the media. With Jamal's permission, Samantha wrote a detailed report about the incident on flight KS-907. The article quickly went viral, along with the video clips capturing Captain Shaw's actions. Public outrage erupted. Civil rights organizations spoke out in support of Jamal, demanding that the airline review its entire training and operational procedures. Within a week, the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, officially launched an investigation, partly based on the complaint Jamal filed from the plane. They interviewed the crew, First Officer Aaron Wells, and the passengers. They also examined flight data to see if the operational decisions were influenced by Captain Shaw's personal emotions. As the results began to unfold, everyone was shocked. Captain Shaw had previously received several similar complaints but had been ignored by the airline. Meanwhile, Jamal tried to return to his normal life, focusing on his safety compliance consulting work. The big meeting in San Diego went smoothly, though the after effects of the flight still lingered in his mind. Calls from reporters and lawyers flooded in, asking if he intended to sue the airline. Jamal kept silent for now, waiting to see how the airline would handle the situation internally. 2 months later, Jamal received a letter from Skywave Airlines. Inside was an official apology, along with the results of the investigation. After a thorough review, including passenger testimonies, flight data, and compliance with federal regulations, we conclude that Captain Bradley Shaw's actions seriously violated professional standards and ethics. Therefore, Captain Shaw has been terminated from Skywave Airlines. We will also implement reforms to ensure that such incidents never happen again. Jamal felt a sense of relief mixed with sadness. A man had lost his entire career because of his arrogance and prejudices. The FAA report also revealed that Captain Shaw's pilot's license had been revoked for 1 year, a severe punishment in the aviation industry. The story of that turbulent journey had propelled Jamal into a role as an advocate for justice in the skies. He collaborated with Samantha on many follow-up articles and even agreed to interviews to share the necessary reforms in the aviation industry. Chloe and Liam also publicly praised the unity of the passengers who stood up against injustice. The public response was overwhelming. Many passengers who had experienced discrimination also shared their stories. Under pressure, Skywave Airlines undertook a major overhaul, reorganizing its diversity training program and changing its seat dispute policies to ensure transparency and fairness. They also publicly thanked Jamal Brooks for helping them recognize their shortcomings. As for Jamal, he continued his consulting career with a renewed sense of purpose. He had witnessed firsthand how the power of a single voice, when amplified by unity, could change an entire system. The journey from those suffocating moments at 30,000 feet to the fight for justice on the ground proved an eternal truth. Courage, solidarity, and compassion always triumph over discrimination and injustice. From the tense moments at 30,000 feet to the moment when the truth was revealed under the light of justice, Jamal Brooks' story has shown us that a single voice, when amplified by unity and courage, can shake a system that seems invincible. Not only did he change the fate of a flight, but Jamal also ignited a spark of hope that justice always exists, as long as we dare to stand up and speak out. Let this story remind each of us that, no matter where we are, courage and compassion are the strongest wings that help us rise above any injustice. If you felt the power of this journey, please like the video, share it with those who need inspiration, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue spreading stories that touch the heart.